banks were born and have lasted right up till the present day. Coming up in the next episode, the Byzantine Empire Part 2. For over 1,000 years, Byzantium was the point that united trade between Europe and the East. It was the bridge that linked Europe to the enormous wealth of very distant countries, and people were dying because of diseases that spread through the capital. And to cap it all off, during the 8th and 9th centuries, many civil wars shook the foundations of the empire. The Turks finally arrived in front of the gates of Constantinople in April of 1453. The Turkish Sultan Mehmed II set up his tent in front of the gates and declared he wasn't leaving till he entered the city. You see, the world had changed a lot by the 4th century AD. It was not enough to conquer, plunder, and dominate territories to maintain power and wealth. Now there was another way to create riches: by trading goods with the Far East. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued to flourish. Eventually, it transformed into what we call the Byzantine Empire, and it lasted over 1,000 years. Justinian used the vast amounts of money that were coming in and ordered the building of a great many works. First, he built the most important war fleet throughout the Mediterranean, and with it, he protected trade ships from pirates. Justinian decided to unite the empire with religion, and so he told all the inhabitants of his empire to adopt Christianity as the only religion. Christianity was spread far and wide throughout the empire. He also ordered the building of a great many churches. Nobody could have had any doubts about where to go in order to pray. The time compass. Byzantine Empire, Part 2. The Byzantine Empire encompassed some of the most wondrous territories in the ancient world. But after the death of Justinian, none of the emperors who followed were able to maintain what he had achieved, and the borders of the empire began to weaken. In the 7th century, the Lombards ejected the Byzantines from Italy. The Slavs took over the north, and the powerful forces of Islam conquered many provinces to the east. The Byzantine Empire was shrinking all the time.
Wow! It sounds like they were having a bad time!
Yes, with so many wars, the Byzantines were overwhelmed, and people were dying because of diseases that spread through the capital. And to cap it all off, during the 8th and 9th centuries, many civil wars shook the foundations of the empire. And just when the Byzantines thought it couldn't get any worse, in the 11th century, the Turks conquered the city of Jerusalem and threatened to invade the empire from the east. So Emperor Alexios did the only thing he could do. Help! He called for help. And the person he called in his time of need? The Pope, who was governing the Church of Rome and who was one of the most powerful men at the time. And yes, he didn't really use a phone, but you get the idea. Hello, Pope Urban II? You gotta send some people to help! This call for help started a very important period of history, the Crusades. The Crusades. Jerusalem was a very important city in the ancient world. Even though the name means City of Peace, everybody was fighting over it. Jerusalem was founded by the Israelites on land that was significant to them. But Jerusalem also was home to the Holy Sepulchre of Christ, and so the city was very meaningful for the Christians too. But in the year 1071, the city had fallen into the hands of the Turks, and they did not allow any Christians to approach the holy tomb of Jesus. Pope Urban II called together all the nobles of Europe and told them, "We need to go back to the Holy Land and reclaim it for Christianity." And from all across Europe, kings, dukes, and princes gathered armies, and they set off on the long journey to the Middle East to take back the city of Jerusalem in the name of Christianity. A series of horrific wars followed. They began in the year 1096, lasted almost 2 centuries, and were known as the Crusades. Once they had achieved their religious aim, these same European nobles set their sights on another target. "Hey, since we're all the way over here, why don't we conquer Constantinople as well? What do you say, guys?" The Christians from the West didn't agree with the Christians in the East. So in 1204, the Crusaders conquered Constantinople. For almost 60 years, the Pope, leader of the Western Christians, controlled the Byzantine Church from Rome. And if that wasn't trouble enough, the vanquished Turks had not given up the fight for Constantinople. They were amassing their armies to the south and advancing slowly. It seemed that the Byzantine Empire was doomed. Fall of Constantinople. The Turks finally arrived in front of the gates of Constantinople in April of 1453. The Turkish Sultan Mehmed II set up his tent in front of the gates and declared he wasn't leaving till he entered the city. Behind him was a vast army whose numbers were greater than the population of the whole city. And behind them was the Turks' secret weapon. You see, on their journeys to China, the Turks had discovered a powerful invention: gunpowder. Tales say that Mehmed brought with him a cannon so big it had to be pulled by 300 oxen. This cannon was the largest the world had ever seen. It fired balls that weighed over half a ton, launching them over a kilometer away to destroy the walls of Constantinople. After 2 months of fighting and constant bombardment, the walls of Constantinople fell and the Turks entered the half-destroyed city. Mehmed II took control of Constantinople and turned it into the capital of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. And he changed the name of the city to Istanbul, which today you can visit in the country of Turkey. The end of an era. For over 1,000 years, Byzantium was the point that united trade between Europe and the East. It was the bridge that linked Europe to the enormous wealth of very distant countries, especially China and India. But Europeans lost this trade link when it fell into Turkish hands. All of Europe was desperate to find new trade routes, which is why a great many adventurers and explorers emerged at that time. 39 years after the fall of Constantinople, a Spanish expedition led by Christopher Columbus set off to sea. Columbus was convinced that the world was round. That's right, it's round, like this little ball. He thought that if he sailed towards the west, he could go all the way around and arrive in the east. Columbus was right, but when he tried, he hit a huge obstacle. Columbus stumbled across an entire continent that no one in Europe knew was there. So when he landed, Columbus thought he had reached India. But these lands were really the Americas, and his discovery began a completely new chapter in the history of civilization. Let's dig a little deeper with our time compass and find out about the history of gunpowder. Mehmed's cannon helped the Turks to destroy the thick walls that protected Constantinople, which is how they took control of the city and all that remained of the Byzantine Empire. But where did this powerful weapon come from?
Mehmet's house?
No, I mean, where did the idea of a cannon come from? That is, using gunpowder to fire something. The idea originally came from China, where many amazing discoveries and inventions got their start. In the 9th century, Chinese alchemists discovered that by mixing sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, they could make a substance that would burn easily. The Chinese used this magic black powder, what we call gunpowder, to create beautiful firework displays during ceremonies to scare off the spirits of the night.
Did Mettman invent it?
See how well it works? Then in the 12th century, the Chinese began using bamboo tubes to launch projectiles at their enemies. The cannon was invented. But bamboo didn't work too well, as the tube would be destroyed when the cannon was fired. So the Chinese eventually started using metal tubes around 1290. In the middle of the 13th century, Mongols swept over the lands of Europe, conquering everything in their path, and bringing with them weapons loaded with gunpowder. Up until that time, Europeans did not know about the technique of creating gunpowder, and they fled in terror of these conquerors. The Turks had also learned how to use gunpowder, and this advantage was key in their conquest of Constantinople. It was only after the 14th century that the technique of creating gunpowder began to spread throughout Europe. Great advances in metallurgy in the 16th century allowed for the creation of very powerful weapons, as well as smaller weapons that were easy to carry. From then on, firearms grew more refined and were used more and more, until they completely replaced all other forms of warfare. Time compass.
Byzantine Empire, Part 1.
The years between the fall of Rome and the beginning of the Renaissance has been called the Dark Ages. It is also referred to as the Middle Ages because it came between the splendor of ancient Rome and the modern era. In other words, historically, the Middle Ages were thought to be a bad patch in history, a period of transition, like a dark basement in which humankind remained hidden and came out again into the light around the year 1500, when those classical ideas that had made the Greek and Roman ages so brilliant were reborn. But many things did indeed happen during this period, because in reality, it was during these years that the Europe we know today was being formed. Spain, France, Italy, Germany, Great Britain, the Netherlands, all of Scandinavia, Austria, Hungary, so many countries and cultures, are all descended from the peoples that occupied these territories after the fall of the Roman Empire. During the 10 centuries of the Middle Ages, these peoples created kingdoms and shaped the Europe we know today. It was the beginning of modern Western culture.
The Franks.
Around the time of the 5th century AD, Germanic peoples from Central Europe were attacking the stability of the Roman Empire. Remember?
Yes, of course.
Very good, Pipo. So you would also remember that it was a group of Germanic peoples who entered and destroyed Rome. This group of Germanic warriors were made up of many different factions that were always fighting against each other. Lombards, Vandals, Goths, Visigoths, Burgundians, Saxons, and a people that managed to stand out from all the others, the Franks. These strong and very warlike people came from areas near the Rhine River in today's Germany. The Franks had a foothold over the others because they had something that gives a society a huge advantage over its neighbors: a great leader. When he was born, who would have known that Clovis would begin leading his people at only 16 years old and would never be defeated?
Never defeated? Wow!
You bet. In the year 481, he became the first king of all the Franks. And under his command, the Franks expanded out from their homeland, fighting against all their neighbors and conquering most of the former Roman province of Gaul, that is, today's France. which to this day we call France because it was named after the Franks. Clovis governed from the budding city of Paris, and later he married a beautiful princess of the Burgundy people named Clotilda. Clotilda, though, had embraced Christianity, a religion that the Franks did not believe in. But Clotilda talked about it, and talked about it, and talked about it, till eventually…
Hey, you know, you're right. We Franks should all become Christians.
And so it was decided Clovis would be baptized a Christian. This was an important event because from Clovis on, all the Franks converted to Christianity, and this formed a very important relationship between kings and the Christian church that would last for centuries.
Feudal Knights.
The Franks had a custom that over time became very common throughout Europe. When a king died, his kingdom was divided up amongst his sons, the princes. Each would have their own lands and would be able to build their own castles to watch over them.
Wow! So each prince got to build his very own castle!
That's right, Pipo. The kings and princes had to protect themselves from their enemies, because much of the job of governing at that time involved defending properties and attacking new territories. To do this, each king needed many knights to volunteer for military service. If a knight was particularly brave or noble, the king gave him his own lands where he could build his own castle. The knight was promoted to a duke, which means to lead from the front. The next promotion was to the title of count, which means owner of a county. Knights defended the honor of the king and pledged their absolute loyalty to him until death. These bravest fighters who acquired lands and titles and rose up the ranks were known as the nobles of the sword. Thanks to this ancient custom of the Franks, the sons of nobles inherited the same rights, and, just like their fathers, they would each have a piece of land